Welcome, everyone, to RB1 Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Fake Teams Podcast channel. I am the consummate professional, worshiper of N'Keal Harry, constant doubter of Alvin Kamara, and would kindly like you to wear a mask so we can all watch Cam Newton remind the NFL just how good he is. Your humble host, Pete Rodgers, and I am joined by all of the guys. We have the Duck Father, recovering Texans fans, DK Metcalf's #1 admirer, and caster of the double reverse chutzpah, resident old man Clark Barnes. El Sabatia, proud father Quentin Nelson, Scotty Miller fanboy, the coach whisperer, the wine sipperer, the Will Disleyer, working girl Jordan Smith, and of course, fantasy football's premier internet doctor, #2 Walter Sobchak, but #1 Tarzan, fan of what scientists lovingly call, quote, facts, thinks your favorite team is run by donkeys, the gingered mustached man, Nick Botiford. Guys, how we doing today?
Doing great, Pete.
Great. Good, Pete. How you doing?
I am doing well. Both Jordan and I pounded our dinners to be able to be fully ready and prepared to knock out our new double show. So excited! I'm ready. I'm ready to talk the NFC North, you guys. I think there's a lot of good. I feel like there's a lot of good high level fantasy talent there. And I'm curious, before we get into it, we're going to obviously talk elites. We're going to talk about players we're not drafting, league winners, and late sleepers, yada, yada, obviously. But something I want to start us off our conversation with is each of these, I feel like this is one of the only divisions where each team has a premier fantasy wide receiver. So I'm curious right off the bat, who among Devonte Adams, Adam Thielen, Allen Robinson, and Kenny Golladay would you most want to have on your fantasy? Clark, we'll start with you.
So at their price or just at all? Because I think it's really obvious if it's just at all. I think they're ranked appropriately. I would like Allen Robinson the least because he's going to play with Mitchell Trubisky or, if we're lucky, Nick Foles. I think at cost, I think
sure,
Adam Thielen.
Let's go at cost, yeah. Adam Thielen, yeah.
Yeah.
Jordan, what about you?
Yeah, I think as a whole, I kind of had issues with, and it relates to this question, obviously. I had issues with, stay away because I think there's a lot of players in this division that, kind of land where they're supposed to. Just like what Clark said, the pecking order of where these wide receivers are going in terms of average draft position is pretty much exactly where I would want them. Devonta Adams, followed by Kenny Golladay, Thielen, and then Allen Robinson.
Yeah, I'll pair Clark's answer. The clear cut fantasy dominant guy is Adams, but at cost Thielen.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling too. Though I do love me, and a little tease here before we get into our trustworthy elites. I do love me some Allen Robinson.
If he was guaranteed Foles, then
you would be in.
Yeah.
Well, so let's get into trustworthy elites. There's no one more trustworthy than the elites. Waiter, I ordered the 89 Chateau, not the 99. And I'll start us off. We'll go right into Allen Robinson because he's my guy. Anytime I'm drafting #1 wide receivers, if I'm paying early for a wide receiver, I like clear #1 guys, like the alpha guy when I take an early receiver. And Allen Robinson is that to a T, right? The next guy in the Bears offense pass-wise is probably Anthony Miller or maybe Tariq Cohen. So there's not someone there. It's not a #2 guy who's going to challenge Robinson in terms of targets in the Bears offense. He proved last year, to your point, Nick, he can still produce no matter who his quarterback is. It wasn't like he had a slouch season last year with Mitchell Trubisky under center for the most part. So I think he's going as the wide receiver 10, 28 overall, meaning you can get him in the middle of the third round, which – my God, that is gorgeous to me because I can go RB1. I can go running back in the first 2 rounds and then take Allen Robinson as my wide receiver 1. He's a lock in my book to get 130 plus targets. And when the Bears get into the red zone, at least last year, Matt Nagy likes to throw the ball. They threw it 60 times. I think they had 60 pass attempts within the 20 and last year, and they had, I think that was compared to 40 rush attempts. And when Mitch was passing the ball 61 times, almost 35% of those went to Allen Robinson. So I think he's the clear number one in Chicago. I think if we do get any Nick Foles, suddenly Allen Robinson's, I think, fantasy value is even boosted. But at wide receiver 10, I think that's perfect for him, and I will happily take him at that value and not look back as my wide receiver 1.
The only thing I want to correct there is that I don't think he proved last year that he can play with anybody, because he's been playing with Bortles.
True. That's true. Allen Robinson has shown throughout his career.
Yeah. And I mean, in college, wasn't it like Hackenberg? Like, this dude's never had a competent passer. And now he might have Foles. And like, Foles, I think Foles will be the best QB of his career. And last year, Robinson was number 3 in the league in targets. So I have to think with Foles in there, he could match that number. And if that's the case, like the number of errant passes, especially, God, it's so crazy. Like, Trubisky's not an ambi thrower. He can't throw left. I don't know if you've looked at like his left.
He's the Zoolander of quarterbacks.
Yeah, exactly. It's so, if they got competent quarterbacking in there, Robinson, his ceiling is seriously like in the alpha dog range, and it like in the Julio Adams range,
like a top 4 fantasy receiver this year.
Yeah.
I like Thielen and Cooper behind Robinson a little ways down, but at the same time, if it's Nick Foles, then Robinson's, like you guys said, his stock goes way up. Both those guys, I just had to battle through Jacksonville to be reborn in Chicago in some way. The Bears didn't exactly do a whole lot to threaten the idea that Robinson also won't get another like huge chunk of targets. Anthony Miller didn't exactly take the next step like they wanted. He could take another step this year. They added Jimmy Graham. Asked me about him and how I feel about his value to a football team. So yeah, I think whenever you can get a top dog at what is he overall? 28 overall.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah, and for me, there's just too many guys around him to, at that time, take someone who says, well, if only the person who he's completely dependent on for fantasy value wasn't bad, then it would be a great pick. He did show last year that even with a horrible quarterback, he can be good. I just don't like betting on things like that to happen when I can bet on someone like Thielen, who has at least an average quarterback and is going to be featured. But Robinson is an absolute baller. Just no question about it.
Let's dive into Thielen. We've talked about him a lot on this podcast, but Nick, he's your trustworthy elite this year from the NFC North.
Yeah. So if we look over what the Vikings offense did last year, it's a little, it kind of lies to you because they had so many injuries that they relied so heavily on throwing to non-receivers or just running the football. If you go back to the 2017 and 2018 seasons, Thielen, he had 143 targets to Diggs' 95. 2018, he had 155 to Diggs' 150. Last year, Diggs topped the team with just 95. Now with Diggs gone, I just think that Thielen is in line to return to that 150 target dominance to make matters better. This year, let's see here, they play the third softest blended pass defenses per Sharp Football and 10th softest in terms of pass defensive efficiency. So what you're looking at is an easy schedule for a guy who, as Clark said, has a competent quarterback and could get 150 targets. I think it'd be really difficult for him to not finish as a top 10 receiver.
Yeah, and I agree with you that Thielen is the pick, and I've come at it from a different angle. I think what happened a couple of years ago shows what Thielen can do as a number one wide receiver, but what bodes well for him is what you like to do in the Kubiak-Shanahan offense. You run outside zone, you run inside zone, and then you run play-action fakes to the streaking wide receiver down the field, which Thielen has made a career out of doing, or you throw it to the tight end, who we'll have more on later. But yeah, Thielen's going to be the number one. It's always been a bit of an odd situation. It seemed like the Vikings didn't want their two good wide receivers with Diggs and Thielen, and were never really able to figure that out, which makes no sense. Having two good wide receivers is good. But now Thielen's the man, and this offense features one wide receiver. So I think Thielen is really flirting with that top 3 or 4 wide receiver finish this year.
And Adam Thielen going almost in the 4th round is just preposterous to me. He's going 31 overall, which Like and wide receiver 12, I think in half point. That is chronically undervalued in my opinion for him.
Yeah, so the Vikings were one of those teams that used 21 personnel the most last year, and just for the sake of the people that they have there, Irv Smith Jr. will probably make a jump while Kyle Rudolph takes a step back. I like Justin Jefferson a lot. I think he's a really good player, but I don't think he's just going to automatically step in his rookie year and be a 1-for-1 replacement for Stephon Diggs. So that leaves a lot of space for Adam Thielen to just kind of put in his work. And I think what we saw last year with this offense is that, when Stephon Diggs said he wanted the football more, he got the football more, but then Adam Thielen's like, hey, I'm still here. And then he would burst out and have just an explosive game every now and then. So I think we can expect to see that kind of level out a little bit more for Thielen. And again, it's the same situation like in Chicago. He's the clear number one guy. So
let's keep talking about clear number one wide receivers, because Jordan, there's really no one in Green Bay who's going to challenge Devonte Adams for targets if he can stay healthy and on the field, which we had a scare today during practice where he seems to tweak his back, maybe, possibly, question mark.
He apparently tweaked his right leg, went in the Hudson Center for like 20 minutes and then was back out and running and doing things right away. But yeah, so with Devonte Adams, I still like him as a first-round wide receiver. The Packers are going to be leaning more into 21 personnel again this season. So that means the number one and the number two wide receiver are probably going to be who are dominating the amount of targets in terms of the wide receiver load. PFF found that Devonte was open for 88% of his targets last year. So only 12% of his receptions were contested. He also received the most touches in the red zone of any player on the Packers, despite missing some games. So as soon as they get down to the 20-yard line, it's really the Devonte Adams show. He's great off the line of scrimmage. And the Packers were second last year in red zone scoring, and Devonte Adams had a big part in that. And they were the highest graded PFF team in the red zone last year as well. So if Devonte Adams can stay fully healthy, he's lights out. He's a good pick.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Pretty simple math here that Devonte Adams is incredibly good, and I wasn't able to get Aaron Rodgers in on any of my picks here, but
draft Aaron Rodgers.
I like to visit narratives. I visit my condo on Narrative Street as often as possible. I really believe in the angry Aaron Rodgers season, and a way to make yourself look really good is throwing the ball to Devonte Adams. So he's going where he should be, unattainable for a lot of people in drafts, or you have to spend your first round pick on him. But there's very good reason for that.
Yeah, I like him at the 1-2 turn. If I get him at the beginning of the second, then that'd be stellar. For all the reasons that Clark just mentioned, he's going to be a target hog. I do think we have to keep an eye on the ankle. It's not good to see soft tissue injuries in the preseason, and he was able to go back out there as you can with a low grade or a low ankle sprain. Like you can totally play on that, but now there is a low ankle sprain, so we just need to be mindful of that while we're consuming their practice reports.
Clark, talk to us about the clear-cut best running back in the division.
So I've got Dalvin Cook here, pretty obvious, and I didn't want to bring this up to talk about how good Dalvin Cook is, because half the folks won't even have an opportunity to draft Dalvin Cook. He's going number 6 or 7 overall, but I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about handcuffing. So I think in general, handcuffing is not the greatest idea because you're tying up 2 roster spots for at best 1 player. Roster spots are important. You never know when someone's going to go down, and having the backup can let you dominate 2 or 3 different situations. But, handcuffing harkens back to a different time when running backs were really dominating fantasy football and dominating NFL football, and when teams had really clear depth charts. So when your guy went down, when you had the backup, it didn't really hurt your team. It's a different NFL now. We've got running back by committee. We have muddled depth charts. And so now handcuffing needs to be done really judiciously. You just need to be careful and really think about it. But in Minnesota, for a top 5, top 7 pick, and a 10th round pick, you can handcuff Dalvin Cook and feel really confident that you're going to have one of the best rushing attacks in football sewn up all year. The only reason Cook is going 7 instead of 3 or 4 is because of an injury history. And Madison showed us last year he's absolutely the number 2 back behind Cook, and it is a 1-to-1 replacement scenario. So I picked Alvin Cook to get everybody's thoughts on handcuffing and why this is one of the only situations in football where I think that it's a good idea to do that this year.
Yeah. You are not too worried about Cook's injury history if paying up for him at going 7th overall?
No, I am. And that I can get his potential replacement in the 10th round or drafting him way too early in the 8th makes me feel like I'm getting a 16-week starter for the fantasy season. In
an offense that we know can really produce a solid RB1.
In a Shanahan offense. The person who taught Shanahan how to do this, other than his dad, is running this offense.
I think all this is really well put, and bringing up the Madison factor as being one of 3 or 4 raw handcuffs that are worth rostering. The injury history with Cook is extensive. His SC joint is I believe that's just one of those injuries that you can just play with, but it's going to take surgery to fix because it's a tendon or tendon-like tissue. Anyway, his talent is undeniable. If he did not have the injury history, then he's firmly in contention to be going among, the Zeke Elliott, Saquon Barkley ranks. For his injury history reasons, I have dropped him below Miles Sanders, who we need to monitor him for injury now, and Kenyon Drake, but he's a beast. So get him and then, get Madison. You'll feel good.
Yeah, I don't have any qualms with Dalvin Cook at where he's at and drafting Madison later. I do hope that the Vikings line is able to hold up a little bit better this year. They were good last year. They made an emphasis on running the ball. They only ran with 11 personnel, 3 wide, 46% of the time. So they like to be big. They like to have the bullies out there. So I'm pretty confident in Dalvin Cook so long as he stays healthy.
All right. Well, let's talk some guys who we're not drafting this year. Red alert. Red alert. Do not draft this player. Red alert. Red alert. And Nick, why don't you start us off? Since Clark built his house on Narrative Street, seems like you're showing up with the bulldozer to tear it down.
This is I'm sticking with tradition here of taking a stance against all 3 of you. There's no way in hell that I'm drafting Rodgers really on any team. He's going as the quarterback 11, which I wouldn't take him if he's the 16th, just because there are so many guys that have such higher ceilings that I would prefer to platoon matchup to matchup. He no longer really has much of a rushing floor, but the writing's kind of on the wall there. They drafted his replacement in the 1st round. Brought in a bruiser back in the 2nd, brought in their version of what they hope to be their version of Kyle Juszczyk in the 3rd. Guerrera, I think his name was, an H-back. But what you see on the depth chart is Devonta Adams. And then Allen Lazard, I think that he's trying to prove that he's worthy of being an NFL starter. And while I think he'll be a target hog, I don't think that he's necessarily a world beater. You look at guys like Marcus Valdes-Scantling, who is looking like a bust. You look at guys like Equinemius St. Brown, who is super talented but refuses to stretch. And so his hamstrings are just always on the verge of popping. It makes no sense to me. Sternberger, tight end, he didn't get to develop in his rookie season. All of that aside, LaFleur, in my opinion, has made it clear they want to be a run-first team. He believes in play action doesn't work without running the football well. You have to be balanced, et cetera, et cetera. What they did really well last year, which was super cool, was passing on 1st and 2nd down early on. The 2020 football preview from Sharp Football has awesome info on this. They killed it passing on 1st and 2nd in the 1st quarter. Unsurprisingly, that's also where they scored way more points than any other quarter. The problem was, as the games went on, they became more and more predictable in what they were doing, and their efficiency dropped. Similarly, the 2nd time that they played a team in the season, all of their per-play stats continue to drop. So, and also, Rodgers, I think that he's in the stage of his career where he can still win up here. He can still win with the mind, but his technical tools do seem to have depreciated somewhat. He hasn't registered a positive completion percentage above expected since 2016. Again, my issue with him is that he's so good, and I think they should use him more efficiently. It's not a knock on him at all. Lastly, they're just taking a big leap in their strength of schedule per Sharp Football. Last year, they faced the 13th softest schedule of defensive opponents. This year, they're lined up for the 9th most difficult. I just don't see this low volume passing attack as being one that's going to bring a bounty of fantasy points. And it's possible Rodgers tried to audible out, but I don't think LaFleur is going to let him. So anyway, that's that.
Yeah, I think all those points stand good to reason. And if Rodgers was still going, 4th, 5th, 6th overall, I think that these would be huge concerns. So it's easier to bet that Aaron Rodgers is going to assert his dominance and be good and not be benched. But I do have to admit, so we have been waiting on Aaron Rodgers to be Aaron Rodgers for a little while now, and he has been on decline. So this is kind of the last year that I'm betting on him just magically recovering and putting it together. Because even though I am a fan of Rodgers, I have to admit that is what I'm doing this year. As I'm saying, the past 2 or 3 years are not an indication of his talent, and he's going to magically be better.
Yeah, I think honestly some people are overthinking this a little bit too much. Aaron Rodgers finished as a top 10 QB in fantasy for 9 out of his 11 seasons as a starter. I won't be drafting him personally just because he's I got to stick with this. He's in that range of like the QB 7 to 12 in that area where I'm just like, I don't want a QB at this point in time. I know the narrative has been that, the Packers drafted guys where they're just going to pound the rock into the back of the offensive line over and over again, but they're mostly just doing a formation switch. Which a lot of the top teams in the league are doing. You probably have noticed me talking more and more about 12 and 21 personnel because it is the most efficient formation. It has the highest efficiency in EPA per pass attempt, yards per play, and the number 1 success rate. And I just think that's more so what they're aiming to do and to be able to just be big and multiple. And that's why they drafted guys like Josiah DeGuara, and they're going to have Sternberger out there again this year. Alan Lazard is a big wide receiver who's efficient. I'll talk about him a little bit later. But yeah, I'm not going to draft Rodgers probably if he slides far enough for me to get out of that top 12 QB range. Sure, but yeah.
Where are we? Oh, Jordan, who are you not drafting this year in NFC North division of football?
Yeah, so in our spreadsheet, you might have saw me put Kenny Golladay with an asterisk by it. I put that asterisk there because I don't really have any reason to not draft him other than the offense that he's playing in which I just read this too, that only 2 out of the 13 seasons has a receiver in Darren Bevel's system gone over 120 targets. Now, if that just kind of limits what Kenny Galladay's ceiling can be, I mean, if he gets 110 targets, I'm not like very upset about that. I'm not crying over it. There's also the possibility that he's like, hey, I got Kenny Golladay. Let's just air it out to him and Marvin Jones. Yeah, I don't have a big, huge knock on Kenny Golladay. He's not exactly going in the first round, so I'm not stretching that badly. Just kind of goes back to my point at the top of the podcast that I feel like a lot of these guys are just going where they should.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in with my do not draft. I didn't have one. I know that we're trying to look for somebody in the first few rounds that we think is priced poorly, and that's really easy for every division except for this one. We talked about one of my least favorite guys in Allen Robinson, but he's still very good. And if you're worried about Mitchell Trubisky, well, he still had a good year last year. Only had a couple of games where he scored under a couple of points, and that's something that I want to try to avoid with my early round picks, not necessarily aiming for the highest of highs, but making sure that we keep the floor intact too. Another one's David Montgomery, but he's going in the 50s or 60s, and Tariq Cohen's proven that he is not capable of handling a big workload. So why not David Montgomery? There's just not really anyone in this division that looks like they're really poorly priced until we get into the 70s or 80s, when I'm just not really interested in anyone in this division. But that doesn't really fit what we're looking for with this pick.
Yeah, and maybe I kind of skewed my pick for this section because I think you're right, Clark. And I agree that there's not a lot of guys in that early round. I think we've talked enough about how everyone's well priced. So for me, who I'm not touching from this division is the Lions running backs. And I guess that's predominantly DeAndre Swift, since Kerryon Johnson is so cheap that it doesn't make sense, that it's not really you're not really risking anything to get him. But I don't have any stats here. I just don't trust the Lions backfield to do anything of true fantasy value. And I'd rather a whole bunch of other players who are kind of going in Swift's range. He's going as the RB27, 65 overall. T.Y. Hilton and Stephon Diggs are right ahead of him, and Michael Gallup and Kareem Hunt are below him. And those guys I would all vastly prefer over a rookie who's coming in with no offseason into an offense that we haven't really seen have any success running the football. We love Matt Stafford in this air attack because the Lions just chuck the ball around, and with Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones Jr. and hopefully healthy and very productive TJ Hawkinson, and Danny Amendola. Can't forget Bedola. I don't have any faith in this Lions rush game to be so good that I want a piece of it. So I'm just avoiding anyone in that backfield, regardless of the hype surrounding them.
Yeah, I don't know if there's hype to avoid necessarily around Kerryon Johnson, but I like Kerryon because of his ADP. Right, like where he's going 103 overall as the RB39. I don't know that there are very many running backs in that range who have access to like 12 touches a game. And it could be more as Swift picks up the playbook. I'm by no means excited about him. He's just kind of like a guy on my
you sound pretty thrilled,
radar.
Nick. You sound like
right,
Kerryon Johnson is you are building a house on Kerryon Johnson. So.
All right, yeah.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I mean he's not an exciting pick, but he's
become so devalued that he's now has value.
He's very similar to Marlon Mack. He's not in as good of a rushing offense as Mack, but what you're looking for at this point in the draft is value, and he's an incumbent running back who's he's trying to hold off a rookie. I don't know. There's some value there if you go wide receiver, tight end early, but that's it.
Yeah, I kind of agree with this because for me, I just don't know what the Lions ultimately want to do with their backfield. I'm not sure. I haven't really looked into it. I'm not sure if they like Kerryon Johnson. If they don't, that's why they grabbed DeAndre Swift, or they thought DeAndre Swift was just too good of a value to pass up. So all those factors make me want to just kind of sit and wait on the backfield to see how it pans out. But Kerryon Johnson having the incumbency, like Nick said, of being the guy who's there in an offseason like this really does help him. So,
yeah. All right. Well, we got league winners and late sleepers coming, but before that, we are going to take a quick ad break. Oh my gosh, I did it! I just landed a league winner! All right, we are back, and Clark, you I guess you already touched on your league winner, didn't you? You already kind of made your piece.
Yeah, I went with Thielen just because of where he's going. Third round picks, when you can jump up to first round value, I think that's big. Normally for this area, I like to look for someone in the 5th or 6th round who's going to start for you all year. But yeah, we touched on him. This offense is set up for one wide receiver to absolutely dominate. Thielen's done that before, and Cousins has shown that he will throw the ball where he's supposed to throw the ball. So yeah, again, an endorsement for Thielen, but that's it.
Jordan, talk about my boy Marvin Jones.
Marvin Jones, wide receiver 38 and 96 overall. We've talked about Marvin Jones, I feel like, for months and maybe years now. We just like this guy. He started slow in the first month of last season, but after the bye, he had several multi-target games, and that's with a variety of QBs, ending with David Blau as his last guy to throw him the ball. He finished 20th in DVOA and 24th in defense-adjusted yards above replacement last year. So with a full season of Stafford, I feel like just him being able to get better than wide receiver 38 is almost a given. He's an 8th round pick right now, and he doesn't. You like Danny Amendola, I know, Pete, but I think it's pretty much a Golladay Marvin Jones show.
Oh, I totally agree. I 100% think
TJ Hawkinson.
Yeah. I guess if Marvin Jones, I think the only knock on Marvin Jones is his health, and that's what's bringing his ADP down. But correct me if I'm preposterous here, you guys. Am I crazy in thinking that if you get 16 games of healthy Kenny Golladay, healthy Marvin Jones, that their stats aren't really going to be that different? Am I crazy in thinking that?
He finished wide receiver 28 last year, so expecting him to outperform 38 right now is not a big bet.
I just feel like if I draft Marvin Jones in the 8th round and he's healthy, I'm getting Kenny Golladay for a massive, massive, massive discount.
Yeah. P, what you're getting at is that over the last 16 games, the two of them have very similar overall box score results. I'm not going to take the time right now to go through each 16 game to figure out.
No, please do. Please do.
But yeah, Golladay only edges them out by a little bit. And I mean, the way that this team, they're similar to a lot of teams. They think you have to run well to use play action well. I wish they'd cut that middle part out, but what they end up doing is having just a bevy of downfield throws. So Darrell Bevel, jeez. Sorry for the near pun. But, yeah, I mean, you get these, like, splash performances out of Jones, where last year, week 7, caught 10 of 13 balls, 93 yards, and 4 friggin' touchdowns. He didn't hit that high all the time, but he had multiple double-digit target games where he produced terrific fantasy results. He's a bit of a monitor the matchups pick, but that's fine. That's fine.
And maybe that's the difference between him and Kenny Golladay, where their final box scores will look similar, but Kenny Golladay is probably going to give you a consistent wide receiver 1 production throughout the entire season, whereas Marvin Jones maybe gives you like wide receiver 2 production for the most part, but then we'll have weeks where he just is the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy that week. And maybe that's the difference.
Yeah, with all the Lions fantasy picks, it's really, can they overcome Matt Patricia?
Can the Lions in general overcome Matt Patricia? I mean, it's kind of a little flabbergasting that he is the head coach. And I say that as a Patriots fan.
Yeah, just a PSA, guys. When you make a mistake, it's okay to admit it and move on. You don't have to, like, triple down.
Yeah. Detroit Lions, if you want to come on to the podcast and defend your hiring of Matt Patricia, we'll welcome you on as an organization. Let's stick with the Detroit Lions because, Nick, there's another member of this passing game that you're high on.
Yeah, so, I mean, Hawkinson, what he showed us is his ceiling last year, like in the debut game where he just obliterated the Cards, was really special. And it wasn't necessarily surprising because of what a decorated tight end he was leaving, what was it, Iowa? Tight end factory, tight end U. Over the season, he did miss some time with an ankle injury, which he said still doesn't feel normal. It's supposed to be fully healthy, but he still notices it, which is, we should pay attention to that. But as a rookie, he averaged 5.3 targets per game. Having it's funny. There's all these PFF grades that or different statistics that bode well for future production. And basically for tight ends, it's if they did anything in the box score in college, that means they're good. He did a lot of things in the box score when he was in college. So look, tight ends take a year or two to develop. This is his second season. He played 11 games last year. Hopefully he hits the ground running in the system this year. Right now he's going 128 overall as a tight end 15. Just looking at some of the tight ends that he is going behind, I mean, there are a lot of guys on here, given his value, I want him more than Waller, Hunter Henry, Tyler Higbee, perhaps even Gronk, Fant, Hayden Hurst. There's a lot of guys on here who I like Hawkinson more, especially at his ADP, but also overall, I might just rank him ahead of these guys too.
I completely agree with everything Nick just said. Let's get into, I guess I still have to do my league winner, don't I? After I spent the opening of this show talking about how Allen Robinson is the only wide receiver in Chicago, and that makes him a great wide receiver 1. Let me convince you that Anthony Miller also is going to have a great fantasy season and you should be drafting him. He's the wide receiver 55, going 155 overall. So you're not investing anything to get him. And it was a bumpy road for him last year when he took over the starting spot after Taylor Gabriel got injured, he put together 5 extremely impressive games from week 10 to week 15, in which during that time he was the wide receiver 16 in half point PPR. I don't think he's going to do that consistently in 2020. But I think that he I think he could have wide receiver 2 potential from a regular basis. And even if he's just like, every week starting flex spot, you're getting him from the 55 spot. Like that's a huge get in my opinion. And so if that's someone who you can like, if you want to stockpile on running backs early, and maybe you go early tight end, and if you want to take every position early and just wait for wide receivers because it's such a deep position, I feel like Anthony Miller, we've seen flashes of what he can do when he's on the field and healthy. And now he's had surgery on his shoulder, which is what was bothering him last year. So he's coming into the season fully healthy in an offense that's going to be needing a number 2 wide receiver. Again, you're putting your faith in Mitchell Trubisky / them making the decision for Nick Foles / them ultimately deciding both quarterbacks are terrible. And I don't know, trading for Aaron Rodgers midway through the season. Sorry, Jordan, it's happening. But yeah, so I think Anthony Miller is a guy where you can get a lot of value. And I was thinking of him as my late sleeper, but I figured, you know what? He could be a league winner. Maybe he breaks out in a huge way.
Yeah, I think everything you said is true and accurate. I just have to throw a little cold water on the excitement here, in that we're hoping that they go to Nick Foles.
It's not the biggest, it's not the most encouraging.
Yeah, I like the pick as a late round sleeper, somebody that you kind of take a dart throw on and hopefully can find his way into a flex spot on your starting lineup. But as a league winner, I'm not sure he's going to help you win a lot of games. And a lot of it has to do with having Mitch Trubisky as your starting quarterback and kind of stunting your progress as a development. But yeah, that's a big hope again.
So I don't think there's much question about Miller's talent. I embarrassed myself in his rookie season by telling people to draft him. Now, it's important to note, as you brought up, Pete, the shoulder has been a huge issue. Like he dislocated it in his rookie year, shredded his labrum. He played with a harness on for the rest of the season and still scored 7 times. He's a very good wide receiver, and I expect him to continue to develop. And at some point in his career, the Bears are either going to get a new coach, a new quarterback, or he's going to go somewhere else. And hopefully we get to see some really fun stuff, because I think he's a dynamic slot receiver. I hope that he doesn't kick Allen Robinson out of the slot routes too much, because Robinson gets a lot of work in the slot too. But Miller, he's a bet on talent kind of guy. I do kind of think that Ryan Pace and his fucking inflated ego are going to keep Mitch Trubisky in there for too long. Yeah. But I think I'm putting words in your mouth here. You put him at league winner because we didn't have a good thing to just say, hey, he's just like a pretty good pick in like the 12th round. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of smushed I felt like everyone else you guys were touching on, and I didn't want to, talk about the same guys over and over again, especially TJ Hawkinson. I really like that as a league winner. And so I just kind of made league winner like a better late round sleeper than the late round sleeper that I'm also picking.
Yeah, so he's a great talent. Hopefully Foles gets in there. I like him a lot.
All right, well, let's move into late round sleeper. Shh. You mustn't wake the late round sleeper. And we'll start with you, Clark. Who you got?
Yeah, so we're going back to the Vikings here, and Irv Smith Jr. going into his second year, extremely athletic tight end coming out of college, had a couple of good games. Been watching a lot of Vikings film lately, and I wondered how Irv Smith did so poorly statistically for the plays that I saw him making. Well, a lot of his plays got called back because of holding and things like that. So Irv Smith showed us last year that he absolutely belongs. One of my spiciest takes last year was how good Kyle Rudolph was going to be, and he ended up getting a lot of counting stats towards the end of the year, but I think he showed that he's a fine player, but he's nothing to write home about. I think Irv Smith Jr. is going to move into that receiving role. I make a lot of comparisons between Kubiak and Shanahan because they try to run the same system, even though you got to give credit to the younger Shanahan where credit is due. He does a lot more interesting things out of it now than just the old playbook from his dad. But Irv Smith Jr. is going to be that George Kittle threat of, if you put a linebacker against him, Irv Smith Jr. is faster and can run better routes to get open. And if you put a cornerback on him, well, then they're going to run the outside zone on you, and he's going to crush that little guy that was supposed to guard him in pass coverage. It's just an easy system for teams to exploit. And I think this is like kind of the last year you'll be able to get Irv Smith Jr. I think he's going to like ADP of 200 or something. So he's still free. I think next year we're going to be talking about how he had a Mark Andrews-esque year in 2020.
I was on board with everything until you compared him to Mark Andrews. That's just a crazy ceiling. But per Reef Hassan, who's reporting from Vikings camp, he's getting lined up outside. His route running looks really good. He's a great receiving tight end in a system that will use him really effectively. So I think it's awesome. As you said, Clark, he's going at the 200 or whatever. And I think you can start him as a good fantasy tight end in week 1.
Yeah, I think he's in a good position to kind of succeed Kyle Rudolph as the season starts here, and we transition to him more as being a guy that's kind of just a Jason Witten type who is a blocker and who will get you, a few good first downs, but really it's Irv Smith Jr. that is going to be eating up a ton of yards from the tight end position for the Vikings. Like we talked about before, they're going to be running a lot of big personnel, so there's not going to be a whole lot of threat from a third wide receiver to take his targets. And I think Irv Smith Jr., if he's lining up at outside, then he's effectively their third wide receiver.
Nick, did you want to? I know you have Alexander Madison here as your late round sleeper. Did you want to add anything more to Clark's spiel about handcuffing?
No, not really. He's very good. They'll use him as a bell cow. Like there aren't very many guys who get 18 plus touches if an oft injured running back gets hurt.
Yeah. No, I think he's a good guy if you're going to invest. Again, like late round pick, you use it, and if it doesn't pan out, he's still going to get you like some production because they did show that they will share the backfield. But if Dalvin Cook ever goes down, you are killing it. Especially, you could probably then sell Alexander Madison to the Dalvin Cook owner for a hefty price.
I will just mention that Cook broke off contract talk. So he's going to play this season on his rookie deal and just, do whatever next year. While he was holding out, Alexander Madison was taking first team reps. Now he's already taken live fire first team reps last year, but it's shaking off the rust with the first team is notable.
All right, street narrative builds for Dalvin Cook leading the league in total yards and points.
Dalvin Cook is getting taken in every single one of Clark's draft by Clark. All right, Jordan, let's go to the Green Bay Packers because we both have a late round sleeper from the team.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of digging on Allen Lazar a little while ago because I was like, hey, they've got to be trying to tell us something here by not drafting a wide receiver in the draft a couple months ago. And I found some pretty decent numbers, especially for a guy who is going to go wide receiver 66 right now, which is between future Hall of Famer, whom we love, Larry Fitzgerald, and
except for Nick. Nick hates Larry Fitzgerald.
And rookie T. Higgins, who we had some fire things to say about him on the last pod. And I found that among wide receivers with 40-plus targets, Lazard finished 12th out of 96 in passer rating when targeted. Per Football Outsiders, Lazard was ranked 36th in defensive adjusted yards above replacement and was up at 18th in DVOA. So that was ahead of guys like Michael Gallup, Marvin Jones, who I talked about before, and Julio Jones. And again, with the draft position at 66 overall, I talked before about how the Packers formations are going to be split using big personnel, including 2 wide receiver sets. If you can get a guy who's got the best look right now, especially if we're talking about Equinemius St. Brown, who was injured all of last year, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who took a big step back last year after a decent rookie season. He has the clearest path to a wide receiver 2 on that roster. So getting him way down in the draft, it's a dart throw, and it could be a good flex play for you at some point.
Yeah, looking at these narrow passing trees is always like it's a good way to just try to figure out if somebody's going to get a decent chunk of work, really similar to Anthony Miller in this regard.
All right, and I'll wrap up late round sleepers and the podcast with the only running back Matt LaFleur has ever seen built like this. Did you know that? Matt LaFleur has never seen a running back built like A.J. Dillon. And I don't know personally what more you need to know than just that mere fact in order to draft A.J. Dillon, who's going as the RB 53, 181 overall. I mean, the man is built like a tank. Obviously, you're relying mostly here. If he's going to have any fantasy relevance this year, it's going to come from being a goal line back. Like that's going to be his primary role, and that's what you're relying on. That being said, like I do think that he's going to take this RB2 job from Jabel Williams pretty easily. He was drafted in the second round. They clearly have a plan for him or thoughts behind why they took him there. And I know they've been preaching the whole offseason that they just want to pound the rock. Well, I'm going to believe them. Let's do it. I'm buying the 6 foot, 240 pound running back that is a bowling ball with legs, and they're going to use him because both Jabel Williams and Aaron Jones are up for contracts at the end of this year. They're going to run A.J. Dillon into the ground because he's a rookie. I don't even know, but figure why not? It's the last round pick. I'll buy this backfield, especially as someone, since this team is, Matt LaFleur hasn't shut up about how much he wants to run the football. So I'll buy one of the running backs here.
I'll talk about A.J. Dillon. So A.J. Dillon right now is a project. He's got an insane athletic profile. There's a ton of pictures of just thirst traps, basically. For
his calf muscles are incredible. I like have them as my background on my desktop.
All right. But anyway, you mentioned him sealing up that number 2 role behind Aaron Jones, taking Jabel Williams' spot. I think that's eventually possible. I don't think that translates to a whole lot in terms of fantasy value. I talked about the red zone earlier with the Packers, and Aaron Jones had, I believe, 33 red zone carries last year to Jabel Williams' 12. So not a whole lot of work from Jabel Williams down there, despite being the bigger back. And I talked about Devonta Adams getting a lot of red zone work as well. So A.J. Dillon does have the inside track. I think he's a project and somebody to push the other two, since they're going to be up for contract possible extensions at the end of the year. But I don't think this is the year for him.
I'm just saying, Jabel Williams last year in that backup role, RB 36.
I think he's going to be just kind of locked in as like the short down or the short yardage goal line back, which just kind of bodes really well. Whoa, where are you going, Pete? It bodes really badly for everybody. And I don't think he's going to fully supplant Jabel Williams this year, because Williams is like the pass protecting specialist. He gets a ton of snaps. I don't think he's very good. I think Aaron Jones is really okay. I know Clark likes him. So I don't think he's good, very good. Aaron Jones is really good, but Aaron Jones. So this was, I can't, this like blew my mind from the 2020 football preview. He scored at a rate that was the 11th highest since 1990. And of the 10 backs who bested him, all of them scored fewer touchdowns the next year, on an average of 10.9 fewer touchdowns. We have to recall Aaron Jones had 19 touchdowns. Like what they did was a massive outlier season, and they performed well at the beginning of games, which I believe it was last year, 78% of the time, if a team was ahead at halftime, they were going to end up winning the game. But as the games went on and as they played teams again, they were less effective. So he's going to have to change. And it is good that they brought in, I can't get his name right, the H-back that they brought in. It's good that they brought him in because they were really bad rushing out of 12 personnel. I'm concerned that, one, there's not enough rushing work period to go around, and two, that the attempts, especially in scoring position, are just going to be so much lower than they were last year. But both Williams and Jones, their contracts are up at the end of this season. And so Dillon, they might try to seriously break him in. So I guess at worst, keep your eye on him. I think it'd be tough to roster him for like 8 weeks with him, getting like 4 carries a game. But good luck to you, Pete.
At the very least, he's a name to put the little flag on. Clearly, I should have just had Anthony Miller as my late sleeper and been like, I agree with you, Nick. TJ Hawkinson's a league winner. Fucked up that. All right. Well, there you go. There's the NFC North breakdown. Make sure to subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts. We are there. iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, whole 9 yards. That is how you'll not only get us, fantasy football, but also fantasy baseball and our fantasy basketball podcast. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at RB1 Podcast. Follow myself at Pete M. Rodgers. Follow Clark at NFL Clark. Jordan at Jordan_Smith27 and Nick at Ginger_Nick without a K. We will be back at you tomorrow to talk the NFC West. Until then, peace.